Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us today
Yeah, my pleasure.
and yesterday.
Yes, of course.
For for anybody who doesn't know, we actually recorded live yesterday, but I goofed up on the recording and we lost it. So we are going to have a redo today. We actually have a chance for Dan to correct all the profanities that he said live yesterday.
I think it was just one,
Just
right?
it's fun. We're not on live broadcast TV yet, but it'll be a great chance to do a do-over and do it the right way. So thanks everyone for watching us today and for everybody who joined yesterday. And we'll get started. Okay?
Yeah, sure. I hope I can be consistent with my answers before.
If not, we'll find out what's the difference and find out what's the truth. So,
Exactly.
Dan, how long have you been in Silicon Valley?
I've been here for like 5.5 years, something like this.
Five and a half
Almost
years.
actually getting close to six.
Uh, Yeah, and how'd you get involved in this business of being a product manager? How did it get started?
Great question. So I started out as an engineer and
Hmm.
just had a regular, my first job out of, well, not college, but like my master's degree. So worked on a CAD CAM software company called Technomatics. And I grew
Hmm.
impatient with, just like kind of um, just coding. And I decided
Uh-huh.
to find my own company, founded my own company.
So what you're saying is that product management is the next step of evolution from being a software engineer?
I don't think so. It's like it's for some people it is, for some people it isn't. I'm not actually not still not sure it was the right the right move. Um, but yeah, I think like for me, I was like much more interested in everything around coding, not just the coding itself. So I think it was kind of not natural for me to fall into that position.
Okay.
Um,
So what did you do in product management before ending up at Facebook?
so yeah, so after I had my own company and I kind of didn't know what to do after we closed, it was like I was a CEO, I was an engineer, I didn't know where to go, what to do. People told me like try product management because this is like the mini CEOs of the product, right? And like we've all heard that before. Big lie. We can come back to it later, but uh, it was actually a pretty good move. I moved to Clarizen, which was a SaaS company doing project management. I spent about a year there and then moved to Face.com. Face.com was a face recognition company. We had products that were like actual apps. We had an API, tens of thousands of developers, and we got acquired by Facebook in the summer of 2012. And moved over. Most of us moved over here to the US, and then spent like the next 4.5 years at Facebook. All of these as a product manager, and now recently I've been at Lyft for about a year and a half.
Okay. So when you moved to the US to Facebook, initially when you worked at Face.com, that wasn't a very big company, right?
Yeah, it was about 10 people.
About 10 people. And Facebook was a little different. Even when you joined, it was much bigger than Face.com, right?
Yeah, it was about 4,000 employees, I think overall, something like 70 PMs.
Okay. Was there a little bit of culture shock when you moved to Facebook from a little startup?
Um, Definitely. In many ways, so in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. I think the fact that I moved in with a team, that I've worked with in the past, and
Yeah.
we knew each other, was easier in some ways. It was probably also like weird in other ways because we would like still, speak Hebrew
Yeah.
amongst ourselves, which was kind of we had to quickly stop that. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's like moving from a very small startup company in Israel to like corporate America. Um,
Hmm.
is very different. It's probably like the best corporate America you can ever find.
Right.
But it is still a very different company, different size. Things don't scale as much, and we can go into like details if you want.
And we will. And just for perspective, you didn't just do face recognition at Facebook, right? You worked on all sorts of projects.
Right. So essentially, coming in, we essentially added all our technology into the Facebook stack, and we worked essentially on face recognition, that its use was tag suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like how we started. Then the team started kind of doing, like, parts of the team started doing other things. We got other people working on our stuff. And I did a bunch of other products around photos and around tagging, owned all of the tags at some point, and then essentially managed to put myself out of a job, which is like what every successful team eventually does once everything is done. And then I actually moved to like a whole different product doing offers, which is a type of ad on Facebook.
Okay. And then you had your own product, right? You built a completely new product that wasn't your idea as well.
Yes. So this was there's actually a great lesson, I think, there. What I did is I added the ability for parents and pet parents as well to essentially share photos of their children and pets on Facebook in a way that matches what they need. So the story is actually like quite funny. This product is called Scrapbooks. It enables you to create a scrapbook for your kid or pet and have all the photos essentially there without them having an account. The lesson that I want to impart on product managers from that specific thing is that you need to actually like listen to your users and like really listen, and not listen just by doing like tests and UX studies, but just like looking at what they're actually doing. So this started by me seeing a lot of people tagging faces of their babies and kids as their spouses. And to me, of course, it was very annoying. As the guy who's in charge of face recognition, you mess up the model, right? Like, or machine learning is like, oh, okay, this is a 30-year-old woman.
When you have non-human spouses, it starts.
Yeah, not non-human, but still, if you're looking at like the machine is kind of like trying to make sense of like who this person is. It's like, okay, so I see a lot of photos of what looks like a 30-year-old woman, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, what is this face? Really cute, really tiny, doesn't look like that at all. So I was like, oh, this is not good. But then I kind of like dug deeper. I started trying to see if like more people are doing it. They had been, and then I kind of started thinking, why is this happening? And kind of like slowly got to the conclusion that this is the way they hack, right, our product for their uses, because they want to essentially share this together. They want to like the both spouses want to feel that they share this. So tagging the other one enables their friends to see it. It puts it on their timeline and notifies them about it, right? So like all these things are working great. So instead of like trying to be like, no, be strict about like, you can't do this. I was like, oh, you're trying to actually have this thing, which is a really great use case. Let's build something for that. And so I think that's a lesson to learn. It was also a great way to see how you can build a team, like, and do like an entrepreneur thing in Facebook, and how
within the company as big as Facebook. So let's talk a little bit about that. So
just like, let me add like one thing, which is like, as this took a while, and as this project was going on, you could see how Facebook growing was actually like starting to have more resistance towards this like really kind of
So let's talk about this. So Facebook is the ultimate startup. Okay, it's still, for a big company, still has startup culture, but it is bigger. It is 5,000 people working on many different projects and so on. So your role as a product manager, is it really a mini CEO? Can you do whatever you want? Can you start a project, take it to completion, or
not exactly? Good question. So I think you end up like, you have a lot of autonomy, and the smaller the company you have, more autonomy, the more you kind of move forward. And now it's, I think Facebook, I don't have the latest numbers, but I think it's getting closer to 30,000 employees. So it is pretty big, and the product org is I think over 500 people. So yeah, the more people there are, of course, the scope gets larger, but also people get a little bit less agency. But in general, you do have a lot of agency. You still work within a framework because you are in a group that deals with something, right? So Facebook has these pillars of, this group is about engagement. This group is about business. This group is about utility, right? So you kind of operate within the bounds of that group. and you're trying to understand like, okay, what is the engagement org trying to do? What is the impact that they're trying to drive? And your team essentially should strive to drive that same impact just through your own products. And you can decide what you want to do. You can decide if you want to like focus on short-term versus long-term, etc. So you have all the responsibility of the CEO, but not like, so
not the total freedom,
but not a lot of it.
Okay. As a new product manager at Facebook, somebody who just came in from a new company and you're trying to absorb this big company, what was the first thing that comes to your mind of something that they said, oh no, this is not the way we work here. We work differently. Did you have a moment like this?
I actually don't remember exact moments. I do remember like more of like general feelings. And I think we kind of talked about it a bit yesterday, which is this thing where you have to communicate much more about what you do. And this communication is both internal to the team and external to other teams and upwards to your manager. And it's pretty complex. So I don't think there was like one moment where we kind of didn't like were kind of frowned upon, because Facebook was indeed and is, and I think like especially at that time was still very much a startup, as you said, and like so moving fast and breaking things was very much encouraged.
Okay, so it wasn't like falling in line with the process, saying, this is the way we work here. You have to test. You have to measure, to predict the results. You have to prioritize. You were still given autonomy as to the way that you could structure your work.
Autonomy, yes, but the structure, essentially this, like the things that you have to do was very much something that was drilled into us. And it's
okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. So when you came to Facebook, there were a few things that this is the way we do product management. What was that like? How is, what do the drill sergeants at Facebook product management teach you?
It's actually much more subtle than that, but yeah, it does end up like being very, very effective and like factory of great product folks, and not just product, right? Great engineers, etc. A lot of it is about the way you kind of communicate, and the communication is not just with others; it's the way you kind of tell the story, if you will, of what your product is. What is your North Star? How do you go about building a narrative? Right, which is something that is like in a lot of big companies you have to do, right? You have to be able to explain really quickly what's your team scope, what do you do, and what are you trying to achieve. So that whole communication piece is essentially you have to convince all the engineers that this is what you need to work on. Now, because everything at the end is focused on impact, right? It's like
it's interesting. Did you say convince the engineers?
Yeah, of course. So
they're not supposed to do what you tell them?
Exactly. That's the part where like you don't have the authority.
Okay.
And I think, by the way, it's pretty healthy. Like I remember in my first like original days as a PM, that was kind of like a pretty weird thing where you had to convince people of like to do what you think is right. The thing is this: everybody is measured on the impact. Right, so every single engineer, unless they're
even engineers, okay.
Sorry.
Even engineers.
Yes, for sure. Engineers are your partners, and this is the way I've been like leading my teams and helping them just like execute throughout all the years, which is trying to bring as many people to the table, as many opinions as you can from the very beginning, from the inception of the idea. Make sure that the engineers are there, and designers are there, and data scientists are there. And the marketing folks are there, and everybody is contributing to this and feels bought in. I don't think PMs have the best ideas or anything like that. I think we're a supportive role, and we're helping people kind of see trends, find a compromise, translate between people who like speak different languages, if you will, because of their point of view and professions. But that's what we do.
So let me stop you there for a second. When you say that the entire team has to be bought in, of course you want, every company I worked in the past, you want your team to be, to care about the project that you're building. You want the team to care about the product and so on. But you said bought in. does it mean more, or do they have, some kind of vested interest in the success of the product? That's unique.
Yeah, this is again, if we're coming back to the concept of impact, every team is measured by what they're delivering, right, to the business ultimately.
When you say measure, is there compensation or results tied into the success of their product?
So it's not the success of the product just by itself, but yes, you have every half you set goals, and if you meet those goals, essentially, then you are compensated accordingly, right? It's like it's a bit more involved than that. You are, as an engineer, as a product manager, as a designer, as everything, if your product is successful and you're meeting your goals and you're doing your share, then essentially you can, you are rated every half. We have performance reviews. And so you're rated every half, and you're like, either you meet expectations or you exceed expectations or you greatly exceed expectations. And these are all rewarded in turn.
Okay, so you said that the team is compensated on the success, which means that, for example, when you come up with a new crazy idea for a project, like the scrapbook, for example, with the pictures of kids and pets and so on, if it's not a huge success, the entire team suffers?
I think so. This is not one thing to clarify. This is not only a results based approach. For example, it is okay. It's actually more than okay. It's often encouraged to take moonshots and take risks and build big products that are essentially not just like incremental steps. And these usually have like a risk associated with them. As long as you communicate clearly what you're trying to do, you've evaluated everything, you're essentially like getting this communicated properly, and it's something you do that is actually celebrated. I've seen lots of people who got promoted for projects that have been like not successful in the traditional sense, but they were successful because what we were trying to do is have a portfolio of, if you think bigger as a company, have a portfolio of things we're working on. So we have like smaller incremental things and keeping the lights on and making sure we're just getting better. And then we have these moonshots of trying new things. So this is a healthy process. Hence that is not penalized in any way.
This is actually very interesting because it's very unique to Facebook. I don't know if it's unique to Facebook, but it's very Silicon Valley culture. We've all worked at non-Silicon Valley companies.
Yep.
It's not necessarily very common that, big companies let you take chances and fail if you've done the right steps in order to avoid the failure and work hard and do what you're supposed to do.
Right. So I think it's definitely not trivial. And this is one of the things that's amazing about working here. It's
in Silicon Valley in general, right?
Sorry?
In Silicon Valley in general, it's not just
Silicon Valley in general. I think like there are people and companies who like are more leaning towards this direction, and others are more conservative. Not every company in the Silicon Valley obviously works this way. But yeah, you want to attract people that are good, and good people are usually not just like talented at their job, but they're kind of they want to do better. They don't just want to do a little better. They want to disrupt things, right? We all hear this. All the startups are disruptive, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And again, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of a product manager or maybe like a product leader that manages several teams, you do have goals that need to meet, that you need to meet to actually get to what the business is trying to achieve. But you have the goals that are this quarter or this half, and you have the goals that are 5 years from now or 2 years from now. And these are usually like quite different, right? You usually can't get to where you want in 5 years if you just do small incremental steps.
Right. So I want to take you back to something you said, going back to product management. So you said it's okay to think big and to take maybe risks that would not be acceptable in other places and go large and do big moonshot projects like you said, but you're expected to do it in a very calculated, well thought out, well executed way, right?
Yep.
So it's good to take a risk, but as long as you do the work correctly. What does it mean to do the work right? What is expected of you as a product manager to plan and to execute?
So it means essentially you taking into account all the factors that you could. You got all the information, and it's gonna be incomplete for sure, but it means you have looked at your data of your current usage, if it's relevant, and understood trends, understood what is happening, saw problems, saw issues, etc. You've consulted essentially with let's say engineers and technical folks to understand if some of these things are feasible. You have gotten feedback from your UX researchers and understand like what's the demand out there. You talk to inbound marketing folk to understand what other companies in the space are doing. You know, kind of like you've looked at all the data and you're compiling it into kind of a recommendation that is based on often some kind of like back of the envelope or napkin math, right? So because of this focus on impact, you have to be like, okay, so let's assume this is successful. What does successful mean? That I'll get like 10% of my user base to start using this, or is it like 50%, right? I don't know, probably closer to 10%. Great. So these 10%, what will happen to them? Will they now be more engaged? Great. How are we measuring engagement exactly? Is it time spent? Is it interactions? Is it something else? And then from there, you're moving towards, okay, so these 10%, right, will interact 50% more. What does it mean for us, right? You know, will they bring other users? Will they essentially kind of like, what is this effect on the overall system? And then you figure out what this looks like. Now, also like it all starts from what you're trying to achieve. You're not just taking bets because like you want to take a bet, right? Your goal as like your team has a goal, your group has a goal. You're trying to move something. And you always have to think about, is this approach the best way to move that thing? And you kind of always kind of have to tie everything back to this goal. Am I moving that thing? Or is there like, sure, maybe this thing, this great idea that I have is brilliant, I'm in love with it, but it will move that goal ultimately by 10%. I could do something else that is like unsexy, but just like works, and it's grunt work, but it will like, the expected value there is like 20%. So right. Guess what? You have to make that calculation.
So let me take you to, you see a lot of CEOs of startups and a lot of product managers at startups. You advise some of them and so on. Taking a risk doesn't necessarily equal doing it recklessly. You just described how to do it the opposite of recklessly. How to take a risk, but it's a very calculated risk. It requires a lot of planning, a lot of thought in order to execute perfectly in order to accomplish that risk. What kind of mistakes do you see some of the startups that you encounter doing, compared to this very calculated approach?
I think being kind of in love with the idea and jumping to like things you could do rather than thinking really closely about the what the goal is, that is the key. All the decisions you make end up being relatively easy if you can all tie it back, to something specific. It's like if you manage to tie it back to a company goal, then it's easy to make the choice between A and B. Otherwise, you're like, well, I don't know what's going to work, right? Like this thing will drive maybe, I don't know, maybe a bit more people posting, or this thing will drive people uploading more photos. Which is better? I don't know, right? But what is your ultimate goal? This tells you what better is. So what I see a lot of people doing, especially like you see this for startups, you see this for PMs and interviews, etc. People jumping to solutions and how they would build something, rather than like why they would.
Why. And do you see this as the essence of being a professional product manager, being able to articulate the why, communicate it, and plan accordingly?
For sure. I think this is the key, right? Because this is the way that focuses everybody and lets them have a direction. And this direction can change, right? Based on, we don't have all the information, you have some of the information, but if you're making the right calculations and choices and have a good narrative around it, which is not just a story, this is your real narrative, like it's like your reason for being, then you can correct along the way. And pivots are not necessarily bad, right? If you know where the north is, yes, along the way you might kind of like start to stray, and correcting back to the north is something to be celebrated. It's not something, oh, we're going in this direction, now we have to change. The pivot is not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. So yeah, I think like as you have to focus everybody along that path and along that ultimate goal, and make sure that like engineering is on board and understands where that is going in the long run, so they can plan accordingly and not just like build a solution that is local. And you need to make sure that the design is also extensible, and you need to make sure everybody's bought in and gives you the time you need, because if you don't communicate that this vision is attainable in 2 years and people expect results after 6 months, then that's bad as well. So this is where both setting that vision and goal and being really focused matters, and also communicating it across the board to everybody.
Do you think this is something a professional product manager would do even in a 10-person startup, or is this just the reality of working in a really large corporation?
I definitely think it's in a small startup as well, because the small startup, it doesn't matter that it's small, it still needs, actually, like maybe even more importantly, you have to be even more focused and more doing the right things. Mistakes are more costly, right? Moving fast is really good because it allows you to make these mistakes. But you do need the direction. If anything, if you think about it, think about like a team or a very small startup, it has like one thing that they're working on. There's no diversification, right? Whereas if you're like a big company and have like multiple teams, or an investor that invests in multiple startups, yeah, some of them will fail, some of them will just like waddle along, and some of them will be like superstars.
Right.
So I think like being in the small setting is even more important, to be super focused and have the narrative and have everybody on board.
Let's talk a little bit about Lyft for a second. You've been at Lyft for a while now, and is there anything that you learned that was new at Lyft or that surprised you? You know, you've already worked at a very good company before, so anything that's...
I think a lot of it is like the importance of culture. Is really, I could see how the culture was changing as more and more people from other companies came in, and as we kind of actively worked at it, how this like the focus on impact and making sure of like what is total ownership, you know, and like where I mentioned before that everybody is responsible for the direction of the product, the execution of it, etc. It's not that the PM decides what to do and the engineers just do it, or that the engineers launch something but it's the analyst who's going to look at the results, etc. It's this total ownership. And
let me ask you a question. There's something here that I think we owe the audience an explanation. Culture is a very Silicon Valley word.
Okay. I'm so into it that
I know we all are in Silicon Valley, but it's not what does it actually mean? You have people coming in from different companies, and when you talk about the culture, what in reality, what does it change in the way that you work?
I think it changes almost everything, right?
What is it?
It's the way decisions are made. It's like eventually like where the responsibility lies, and where if you're given all the opportunity to take the responsibility or not. Is it like so let me give you an example, right? If it's a top-down culture, right? Could be a startup where essentially everything is driven from the top down. This is what we're going to do. These are the KRs for the company. This is what's going to happen, etc. It's a very different, culture, because like you're doing, like your aim is to essentially please your managers, right? And they're trying to please their managers, etc. And it's not necessarily that everybody can like come up with a great new idea from the ground up, because like this is not what the directive was. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of this culture is about like caring and ownership and agency, and making sure that if you are essentially like, you can think about it as we have posters everywhere that are like making sure that the culture seeps through. For example, at Lyft, a lot of it is like uplifting others, right? So it means like you're not doing things by your own, right? You want to make others successful as well. And that it's kind of very vague, but if you like start working and you kind of like think about this, it always means that whoever did the work should present the work, right? And then like essentially if you see somebody good at something that is not their job, you give them a chance to do it and you see how they develop and you teach them and you find all these opportunities to help others. So Lyft has a couple of these cultures, right? And Facebook also had them. Like if you think about it, the original Facebook culture was move fast and break things. It guides you through what you have to do, right? You want to move fast. That's the ultimate thing. If something breaks, but you learn something, it's good, right? This also changed over time, right? Like you can do as the size grows, as your user base grows, as the dependency of the whole kind of humanity on your product grows, then you can like break less things, obviously. Right. But then like we had other such cultures. Another big one that is like both here and Facebook was nothing else at Lyft or Facebook was anybody else's problem, right? If you want to fix something, then you go fix it. And it's not like, oh, I'm not touching it, but it's a problem, I'm gonna let it lie there. No, you found it, you're it. Go and chase it down. So yeah, I think hopefully that's really interesting. A little bit.
So I want to end with a final question. Think about everything that you learned since coming to Silicon Valley, okay? Mm-hmm. And suppose you were a mentor for an Israeli product manager who's never had a chance to be here. What would be the one lesson that you would really drive in that you think is really important for every product manager to know?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one, and it's as tough today as it was yesterday. So I think we kind of touched on it, which is this having this really clear vision and goal of like what you're trying to do, and have it backed up by actual numbers, not being like very fluffy. Like all these things that are your goals have to be super clear. You know, if we're going back to measuring engagement, how do you measure engagement? Is it the time spent? Is it daily active users? Is it people interacting and doing likes and comments? You know, if it's rides on at Lyft, be really critical about the clarity and not being able to game the system, right? It's like you have to come up with what you want to drive, right? Your objective, and then what are the key results, if you will? Like, how do you measure that, right? And it's like, I'm trying to make people's lives better, right? What is the way we're measuring that we're making people's lives better? You need to be crisp and honest with yourself that that's true. And then tie back all the decisions back to that. And kind of hand in hand with this is the communication skills that you must practice all the time and preach it down, up, sideways, all the ways, because this is, if you're not clear enough on what you're trying to do, this comes across in your communication. It feels weak. You can't actually answer questions about tough decisions. So I think it's kind of not one thing, sadly. It's a bunch of things of like this clarity of thought for yourself and then project it outwards.
In the process. Thank you very much. And I want to end with one audience question. Okay. Hadassah asked us, asked you, how do you manage your time between the PM responsibilities? There's meetings, communication, meeting with management, getting buy-in, PRDs, design.
Yep.
It's a lot of things, a lot of demands. How do you make sure that you get the balance right?
Right. So I think I gave some answer on Silo, and I'm happy to, by the way, if you guys have any other questions, I'm happy to answer there. I'm happy to elaborate on this one because it's like a tough one. Oftentimes, I think it's especially in the beginning, the PM calendar looks like blocks of meetings, and then at the end of the day or really early morning, you kind of get the time to work, right? The meetings are your work, actually, right? But it's you have to focus, right? So let's start talking about I think she asked about writing a lot of PRDs and like really detailed ones for multiple projects. So if you have a good team around you that everybody understands what needs to be done, you don't have to be that prescriptive, right? You don't have to be like, this button needs to do this thing, right? And if you press back, it has to go back to the previous screen, but not with this banner. This is really tedious, and you will miss things anyway, like no matter how much of a superhuman PM you are. And the right way to approach this is have a team that supports you. And this team doesn't mean that like you have like other PMs working with you, but it means the engineer implementing these things, he or she understands what they need to do. So if like being fast is part of the directive and part of your vision, like be the fastest app out there, they will make sure that now every single interaction feels super fast. The same will go for the designer, etc. Right? If you have to like specify each single thing and only the context and why you're doing these things is only in your head, that's not scalable. And as a PM, as you grow, what you need to do is scale. And later you will scale by having other PMs that deal with like other areas. But in the beginning, when you're an IC, an individual contributor, you have the team around you. So that's the question about like PRDs, right? The other one is about time management. So for meetings, there's like whole books have been written about this, right? But it's like play meeting defense, right? If you're looking at a meeting, ask yourself, should I be in this meeting? Is this like, even like more refined? Can the decisions that need to happen without me in the room, right? If they can, that's great, don't go. It will actually empower the people in there to make the decisions and own the decision. This is the culture part, right? Own the decision and implement it correctly, rather than like you being there and prescribing what it should be. So, and then how do you know that you should be there or not? Well, first of all, is there an agenda? If there's no agenda, no meeting, right? And agenda cannot be discuss project X or something. No, it has to be like make this decision, look at this evidence and come up with next steps, etc. It has to be really clear. And I'm not shy in this point in my career of like, I don't know what you want to talk about. What do you want to talk about? Otherwise I can't come, right? Or I would decline it and essentially until an agenda is there. So yeah, I think like just like try, instead of like going to every single meeting and being in that meeting, maybe like working on your laptop or doing other things and zoning out and trying to be at like a 1,000 places at once. Just go to the ones you really have to. A lot of the things can be just done offline or done in a consolidated manner. So yeah, do that.
Okay. It's a great answer. Thank you. Thank you very, very much for joining us twice.
Yes.
And I encourage everybody to watch this again. Of course, if they got to this point, they probably did.
and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.